Hollywood cowboys were completely different before John Wayne. They sang songs, wore fancy clothes, and acted more like entertainers than tough frontier men. Wayne changed all of that and created the cowboy image that still defines how we see the American West. Born Marion Robert Morrison in 1907 in Iowa, Wayne grew up far from any ranch or desert. His family moved to California when he was young, and like many kids in the early 1900s, he had no real connection to the Old West. The West was already gone by the time Wayne was born. The frontier had closed, the Indian Wars were over, and most of the real cowboys had hung up their spurs decades earlier. But Hollywood needed cowboys. The Western movie was becoming huge in the 1920s and 1930s, and audiences couldn't get enough of stories about the Wild West. The problem was, the cowboys they were putting on screen weren't anything like the real thing. They were called singing cowboys, and stars like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers dominated the genre. These guys would ride into town, solve problems with a song, and ride off into the sunset, looking spotless. Wayne's big break came in 1930 with a movie called The Big Trail. Director Raoul Walsh saw something different in the young man who was working as a prop assistant and occasional extra. Walsh needed someone who looked like he belonged on the frontier, not on a stage. Wayne was tall, had broad shoulders, and moved with a natural confidence that seemed right for the role. The Big Trail was a massive production for its time, filmed in an early widescreen format that most theaters couldn't even show properly. The movie failed at the box office, but it established Wayne as someone who could carry a Western. The problem was, Hollywood wasn't ready for Wayne's type of cowboy yet. For the next 9 years, Wayne worked in what were called Poverty Row Westerns. These were low-budget movies that played in small theaters and drive-ins. The pay was terrible, the schedules were brutal, and most actors saw it as career-ending. But Wayne was learning something important during these years. He was figuring out how to be a different kind of cowboy. The singing cowboys of the era were clean, polite, and always did the right thing in the most obvious way. They were like superheroes in cowboy hats. Wayne started developing something else entirely. His characters were rough around the edges. They made mistakes. They weren't always likable, and they definitely weren't always right. Most importantly, they felt real in a way that other movie cowboys didn't. Wayne studied real cowboys and frontiersmen. He read books about the Old West and talked to people who had actually lived through that era. He learned how real cowboys walked, talked, and carried themselves. Real cowboys didn't break into song when things got tough. They were practical men doing a hard job in a harsh environment. The turning point came in 1939 when director John Ford cast Wayne in Stagecoach. Ford had been watching Wayne's work in those low-budget westerns and saw potential that others had missed. Stagecoach was going to be a major studio production with real money behind it, and Ford was taking a big risk putting Wayne in the lead role. Stagecoach changed everything. Wayne played the Ringo Kid, an outlaw seeking revenge for his father's murder. But Ringo wasn't a simple good guy or bad guy. He was complicated. He broke the law, but for reasons the audience could understand. He was tough when he needed to be, but he also showed genuine tenderness toward the other characters. Most importantly, he felt like a real person who happened to live in the Old West, not a fantasy character. The movie was a huge success, and Wayne's performance got people's attention. Here was a cowboy who didn't need to sing his way out of trouble. He was willing to use violence when necessary, but he wasn't a mindless killer. He had a moral code, but it was his own code, not something handed down by society. Wayne's physical presence was crucial to creating this new image. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds at a time when most movie stars were smaller and more refined. He moved with a distinctive walk that suggested someone who had spent years in the saddle. His voice was deep and measured, and he spoke slowly, like someone who thought before talking. But it wasn't just Wayne's size that made him different. It was how he used that size. Other big actors of the era tried to be intimidating or overwhelming. Wayne used his physical presence to suggest competence and reliability. When Wayne walked into a room in a Western, you believed he could handle whatever problem was about to arise. The timing of Wayne's rise was perfect. America was heading into World War II, and audiences were looking for heroes who could handle tough situations. The singing cowboys suddenly seemed childish compared to what was happening in the real world. Wayne's cowboys were men who could face serious danger and make hard decisions. They were what Americans wanted to believe about themselves as the country prepared for war. Wayne's partnership with director John Ford produced some of the greatest westerns ever made. Earlier movie cowboys were essentially children in adult bodies, simple and pure in their motivations. Wayne's characters were adults dealing with adult problems. They had histories that haunted them. They made decisions that had real consequences. They lived in a world where violence was sometimes necessary, but always costly. Wayne also changed how movie cowboys related to other people. The singing cowboys often seemed to exist in a world where everyone was basically good-hearted, and problems could be solved with a good talk and maybe a song. Wayne's cowboys lived in a more realistic world where some people were genuinely bad and had to be dealt with accordingly. His characters were often loners, but not by choice. They were men who had been isolated by their experiences or their responsibilities. They wanted connection with other people, but their job or their past made normal relationships difficult. This gave Wayne's cowboys a tragic quality that earlier movie cowboys lacked. Wayne's influence wasn't limited to westerns. His screen persona affected how Hollywood portrayed masculinity in general. Before Wayne, leading men were often refined and sophisticated. They were elegant and charming. Wayne introduced a different kind of masculinity that was more working class and practical. Wayne's cowboys worked with their hands. They understood machinery and animals and the natural world. They were competent in ways that mattered for survival, not just social situations. This type of masculinity became increasingly important in American culture, especially during and after World War II. The visual aspects of Wayne's cowboy image were carefully crafted. His costumes were worn and practical-looking, not the fancy outfits that singing cowboys wore. His guns looked like tools, not jewelry. His horses were working animals, not showpieces. Every detail was designed to suggest authenticity and functionality. Wayne's walk became iconic because it suggested someone who had spent years riding horses and working outdoors. His posture was straight, but not stiff, confident, but not arrogant. He moved like someone who was comfortable in his own skin and ready for whatever might happen next. The dialogue in Wayne's westerns was also different from earlier cowboy movies. Wayne's characters spoke in short, direct sentences. They didn't make speeches or explain their feelings at length. They communicated through actions more than words. When Wayne's characters did speak, every word counted. This economical style of dialogue became associated with authentic Western speech, even though it was really a creation of Hollywood screenwriters. Real cowboys probably talked much more than Wayne's characters did, but Wayne's version felt more authentic because it avoided the flowery language that earlier movie cowboys used. Wayne's influence spread beyond movies into television, books, and advertising. When television westerns became popular in the 1950s and 1960s, most of the cowboys were variations on the Wayne template. Shows like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, and Bonanza all featured leading men who combined Wayne's physical presence with his moral complexity. Even actors who didn't look like Wayne adopted elements of his screen persona. Clint Eastwood's man with no name character in the Sergio Leone westerns was clearly influenced by Wayne's example, even though Eastwood took the concept in a different direction. Eastwood's character was even more isolated and economical with words than Wayne's cowboys, but the basic template was the same. Wayne's cowboy image also influenced how Americans thought about their own history. Wayne's version of the Old West became the standard against which other interpretations were measured. His cowboys were brave, independent, and morally upright, even when they operated outside the law. They represented what Americans wanted to believe about their frontier heritage. This had both positive and negative effects. On the positive side, Wayne's movies celebrated values like courage, self-reliance, and standing up for what's right. They showed characters who were willing to sacrifice for the greater good and who took responsibility for their actions. On the negative side, Wayne's version of the West was simplified and often ignored the complexity of real frontier history. His movies rarely dealt seriously with the displacement of Native Americans or the environmental destruction that came with westward expansion. They presented a version of American history that was more heroic and straightforward than reality. Wayne's personal politics became part of his screen image, especially during the Cold War era. He was strongly anti-communist and supported American military involvement in Vietnam. Movies like The Green Berets applied Wayne's cowboy persona to modern warfare, with Wayne playing a special forces officer fighting in Southeast Asia. This political dimension of Wayne's image made him even more influential, but also more controversial. Supporters saw him as representing authentic American values, while critics viewed him as promoting a simplistic and potentially dangerous worldview. Either way, few could deny that Wayne had fundamentally changed how Americans thought about cowboys and masculinity. Wayne continued making westerns into the 1970s, long after the genre had peaked in popularity. Movies like True Grit and The Shootist showed Wayne dealing with aging and mortality, themes that added new depth to his established screen persona. In True Grit, Wayne played a one-eyed, overweight alcoholic marshal who was still capable of extraordinary courage and competence. In The Shootist, his final film, Wayne played a gunfighter dying of cancer, a role that mirrored Wayne's own battle with the disease. These later movies demonstrated how durable Wayne's cowboy image had become. Even when Wayne was obviously aging and the Western genre was declining, audiences still responded to his particular brand of screen masculinity. The image he had created was strong enough to survive changes in both Wayne himself and the movie industry. Wayne's influence on the cowboy image extended beyond his lifetime. After his death in 1979, Wayne became an even more powerful symbol of American masculinity and frontier values. Politicians regularly invoked his name and image. Products were marketed using his likeness. Tourist destinations in the American West advertised their connection to John Wayne movies. Modern Western movies and television shows still use Wayne's template as a starting point, even when they're trying to revise or criticize it. The HBO series Deadwood featured characters who were consciously designed as alternatives to the Wayne cowboy, but the show's impact came partly from how it contrasted with audience expectations based on Wayne's movies. The influence of Wayne's cowboy image can be seen in unexpected places. Action movie heroes from Sylvester Stallone to Bruce Willis have adopted elements of Wayne's screen persona. The strong, silent type who lets his actions speak louder than words. Even science fiction and superhero movies often feature characters who are essentially John Wayne cowboys in different costumes. Wayne's transformation of the movie Cowboy reflected broader changes in American society. The innocent optimism of the early 1900s gave way to the more complex realities of the mid-20th century. Americans had lived through the Great Depression and 2 world wars. They needed heroes who could handle difficult situations, not entertainers who could make problems disappear with a song. Wayne's cowboys were products of their time, but they also shaped their time. They provided a model of masculinity that influenced how several generations of American men thought about themselves. They established expectations about how men should behave under pressure, and how they should relate to women, children, and other men. The global influence of Wayne's cowboy image is remarkable. American Western movies were popular around the world, and Wayne's version of the cowboy became an international symbol of American culture. In many countries, John Wayne movies were people's primary exposure to American values and attitudes. This international influence had diplomatic implications during the Cold War, when America was trying to project strength and confidence to potential allies. Wayne's cowboys embodied qualities that American government officials wanted to associate with their country: courage, independence, moral clarity, and the willingness to fight for what's right. Critics of American foreign policy sometimes used Wayne's cowboy image against the United States, arguing that American leaders were trying to solve complex international problems with the kind of simple, violent solutions that worked in Wayne's movies. Whether this criticism was fair or not, it shows how powerful Wayne's influence had become. The technical aspects of Wayne's performances were crucial to his success. Wayne developed a distinctive acting style that seemed natural and unforced, even though it was carefully crafted. He understood how to use his voice, his posture, and his facial expressions to convey complex emotions without seeming theatrical or artificial. Wayne's collaboration with great directors like John Ford and Howard Hawks helped him refine this technique. These directors understood how to use Wayne's physical presence and natural charisma to maximum effect. They created situations that played to Wayne's strengths while challenging him to develop new aspects of his screen persona. The cinematography in Wayne's best movies was designed to emphasize his iconic status. Directors used low camera angles to make Wayne seem even taller and more imposing. They filmed him against spectacular Western landscapes that reinforced his connection to the frontier. They used lighting and composition to turn Wayne into a mythic figure. Wayne's horses became part of his image. Unlike the fancy trick horses that singing cowboys rode, Wayne's horses looked like working animals. They were chosen for their appearance of strength and reliability, rather than their ability to perform stunts. Wayne's relationship with his horses on screen suggested the practical partnership between a working cowboy and his mount. The soundtracks of Wayne's movies also contributed to his image. Composers like Dmitri Tiomkin created music that was heroic, but not overly sentimental. The music supported Wayne's screen persona without overwhelming it. The famous theme from The High and the Mighty became almost as iconic as Wayne himself. Wayne's influence on costume design in Western movies was significant. His clothes looked worn and practical, suggesting years of hard use. His gun belts and holsters were functional rather than decorative. Even small details like his gloves and boots were chosen to support the impression of authenticity. The stunt work in Wayne's movies was more realistic than in earlier Westerns. Wayne did many of his own stunts, especially horse riding and fight scenes. This added to the impression that Wayne's cowboys were genuinely capable men who could handle physical challenges. Wayne's movies also changed how violence was portrayed in Westerns. Earlier cowboy movies treated gunfights almost like dances, with elaborate choreography and minimal consequences. Wayne's movies showed violence as serious and costly. Characters who got shot stayed shot. Death was final and meaningful. This more realistic approach to violence made Wayne's movies more adult and sophisticated than earlier Westerns. They dealt with the moral implications of violence and showed characters struggling with the necessity of using force to solve problems. Wayne's influence on the Western genre extended to supporting characters as well. The sidekicks, villains, and love interests in Wayne's movies were more complex than in earlier Westerns. They had their own motivations and goals beyond simply helping or opposing the hero. The women in Wayne's movies were often stronger and more independent than in earlier Westerns. While they still needed Wayne's protection in dangerous situations, they were usually competent and capable in their own right. This reflected changing attitudes toward women in American society. Wayne's cowboys also had different relationships with Native Americans than earlier movie cowboys. While Wayne's movies were still products of their time and contained stereotypes that would be unacceptable today, they often showed Wayne's characters developing respect for Native American culture and individuals. The economic impact of Wayne's success was enormous. His movies made huge amounts of money for the studios and helped establish the Western as one of Hollywood's most reliable genres. This economic success gave Wayne considerable influence over his projects and allowed him to shape his screen image more directly than many actors could. Wayne's success also created opportunities for other actors who fit his template. Tall, masculine leading men became more common in Hollywood because Wayne had proven that audiences would accept this type of hero. This changed the entire landscape of American movie stardom. The merchandising around Wayne's image was extensive. Everything from toy guns to lunchboxes featured Wayne's likeness or references to his movies. This commercialization helped spread Wayne's cowboy image throughout American popular culture. Wayne's influence on American language was subtle, but real. Phrases and attitudes from Wayne's movies entered everyday speech. The strong, silent approach to masculinity that Wayne embodied became a cultural ideal that many American men tried to emulate. Educational institutions began using Wayne's movies to teach about American history and values. While historians might question the accuracy of Wayne's version of the Old West, educators recognized that his movies were powerful tools for communicating ideas about American character and ideals. The preservation of Wayne's movies became a cultural priority. Film archives and restoration projects worked to ensure that Wayne's most important movies would be available for future generations. This preservation effort recognized Wayne's movies as important cultural documents, not just entertainment. John Wayne changed Hollywood's cowboy image forever by replacing fantasy with something that felt like reality. He took cowboys from the world of musical entertainment and put them into stories about real human conflicts. His cowboys were flawed men doing difficult jobs in a harsh world, and they became the template for how Americans thought about their frontier heritage and their own masculinity. Wayne's influence extended far beyond movies into American culture, politics, and international relations. His cowboy image became a symbol of American values that people around the world recognized and either admired or criticized. Whether you loved John Wayne or hated him, you couldn't ignore the fact that he had fundamentally changed how cowboys were portrayed in popular culture. The cowboy image that Wayne created continues to influence movies, television, and other forms of entertainment today. Modern Westerns either follow Wayne's template or consciously react against it, but they can't escape his influence entirely. John Wayne didn't just play cowboys, he defined what a movie cowboy should be, and that definition is still with us today.